So we're today. I'm going to be actually serving as your chair. For those who don't know me, I'm Andy Cantwell. I'm superintendent. I know many of you, but I haven't had a chance to meet all of you. So look forward over this evening as well as our coming meetings, getting to know one another a little better. But before we do get started, I think we should begin with Pledge of Allegiance. So if you could stand with me. Ready to begin?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So again, just so you guys know, the protocol for tonight, I'll be helping lead the meeting. Kathy Smith is going to be taking minutes, and she'll be back any minute. But something that we're going to be asking you guys at the end of tonight is to think about whether or not you'd be interested in serving as chair or potentially as secretary, because we do need both of those roles filled, and we'll be asking for approval of that at the start of our next meeting. So again, we'll talk about the end of the meeting tonight, but if you are at all interested, you can see how I do it and then see how you can do it better. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Second?
Motion to approve.
I'm sorry, who said the first?
Oh, I
Kate.
said second. Yes.
We're going to say you said the first.
I'll go first.
Oh, Trevor, did you actually make the motion?
Yes.
See, this is how next time around someone's going to run this better. I heard a second before I heard it first. Trevor made the motion, Kate second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. At this time, we will take public comments. There is one public comment. That's Steve Weed, if you want to come on up. And just so you guys know, we are recording these sessions. We'll be recording all of our meetings. And so for those in the audience, we do ask for you to come up if you have a comment, so that way the speaker picks you up. For those sitting around the table, there are speakers interspersed around the table. You don't need to push any buttons or anything else. It just picks up the conversation, but be aware of that in case there's side conversations or that sort of thing. It will all be picked up on the mic. Steve, go ahead.
So I'm quite surprised. I always end up being first, and I'm never quite ready for it. So first of all, thank each and every one of you for taking the time to be here tonight, and I know that you'll see a lot of each other in the next few weeks. My name is Steve Weed. I live in Ojai proper. My kids have been in the Ojai district for almost 9 years now. They went through TOPA, and they progressed to Matilda and Nordock. I know a little bit about the area, and I'm not here to speak as an expert about what's going on up there. I know that, I guess that the first thing that I got to say in reflection about this particular meeting was that the last 7-Eleven committee was formed to take a look at all of the elementary schools in the district. And to me, I didn't know a lot about what was happening at the other schools. And it was a very powerful meeting because those meetings were participated significantly by teachers and especially by parents in the community. And so typically I tend to be very aware of budgets because this is a small district and that's important. But in deference to the people that I heard speak at that meeting, I think it's really important to have all the facts out and to look at a lot of different options for this property. So just some things that I'd like you to consider, and I know this is your committee, and again, I really appreciate it, but one of the questions that I would like you to consider is that at that 7-Eleven meeting, there was basically costs and student counts associated with each of those schools. And that gave people an opportunity to talk about schools and their strengths and weaknesses. I know in the packets that were provided by the administration for this meeting, there was some information, but there was no numbers in relationship to costs. And I don't know if there's an update for that type of information available as we think possibly about what to do with that property, but I think it would be worthwhile to take a look at the numbers from last time Summit was open as a public school. In the packet that was provided, there were predictions of enrollment going forward, and we've had consultants do that multiple times before. Sometimes those predictions have been reasonably accurate, and sometimes there's been some significant variances. So we need to take a look at how much do we trust the experts in this situation? Is that for me?
It's not your timer.
Oh, okay. I'm used to the thing here.
I had to move, so.
And I keep waiting to get buzzed, kind of like the Gong Show. At any rate, I had an opportunity to talk just briefly with the gentleman who runs the homeschool support program on the property currently. And my background is very varied. All of my brother's children were homeschooled, and I value the sense of that program. And so it's not just an either-or situation. If the committee can be creative and think about ways that we could perhaps accommodate multiple uses for that property, I think it would be at least worthwhile to consider, especially in recognition of the tremendous energy of the local community for what used to be Summit School. The other thing that I'd like to really point out is that as we think about possible uses for it, the district has just gone through a process where they have received bids for alternative uses for the Chaparral property. And I'm not privy to that information, but Ojai is kind of a special community, and certain parts of this valley have a great deal of value. So it might be interesting for you to know what that process has been like in terms of receiving bids on the Chaparral property in terms of other uses. So those are my 2 cents. Good luck.
Thank you, Steve. And next up, we have Kim Rivers. And we don't have the normal buzz, so that's what Kathy's.
It's 3 minutes. I should be shorter than 3 minutes. First, my name's Kimberly Rivers. I'm a resident here in the city of Ojai. My son attends Ojai Unified Public Schools and has from kindergarten, where he started at Summit School. We are one of the families that Summit School brought into the district from out of district. When he started in kindergarten, we lived in Piru. Do you all know where Piru is? Okay. It was about 45 minutes door to door for that drive, and it was totally worth it for our family because of that school. And then as I looked at Matilaha and Nordhoff, I knew that that's where I wanted my son to attend, and that ended up causing our family to move here. My son's now at Matilaha. I wanted to offer a couple of ideas to be considered by the committee. The first is that it's my understanding that the district hasn't actually formally decided to indefinitely close Summit School. My understanding that in terms of process, the decision was for it to be closed for a year. And so I just wanted to put that on the record. I don't know if that box has been checked. Secondly, I like some of the stuff that Mr. Weed was saying about the potential for multiple uses and multiple programs at that school. I'm somewhat familiar with Mr. Bailey's program, and I think it's fabulous. There are families that wouldn't work for, both in terms of financial resources and time. I would have been one of those families, for example, and wouldn't have been able to afford that program. And that leads me into the idea of equity. I know the district is having conversations around equity on many fronts, and it's something that I think you should consider in terms of a school that's geographically separate from the rest of the community, that is in district boundaries, and it has the potential to serve families as a public school that couldn't be served by other programs that are not a public school, right? Whether it's a private program or some other combination. There are other programs in the county and other districts where there are multiple programs on the same property. There's a program with a charter school and a regular public school down along the avenue, as one example. So I think there are creative solutions to figure something out in that vein. And that's it. Thanks so much.
All right, so do we have any other public comments? All right, we're going to move on then. So one thing as we move over to welcome introductions that you'll notice, and hopefully if you had a chance to review the materials, you saw that we included information on the Brown Act. I'll be giving a little more information once we get to the time where we're going to be reviewing these materials. But suffice to say for now that you are a body, you're a group that is governed by this law. And so we actually have to go through more formal procedures than perhaps if you've been involved in PTAs, PTOs in the past, or other groups within our community. The fact that we didn't actually take a few minutes to actually have introductions first and have a little more introduction. The reason that we couldn't do that is because, again, we're governed by Brown Act. We actually have to stick to the way that the agenda's been constructed. So, again, we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but I just want to make sure you guys understood. Before I give any more of an introduction, or before I ask each of you to introduce yourself, we do have two board members here tonight. Board President Thane Whipple and Vice President Shelley Griffin. They, together with me, worked on reviewing the 28 applications that we received to be on this committee. So congratulations that you were selected. You were selected among a really stellar group of 28. We sat down together and worked on trying to find, and I hope that when we go around the room, you'll see, some of the reasons why each of you are at this table. That we want to make sure that we represent various stakeholders. But again, before I say any more, I know that our board members wanted to thank you for your service and have a few comments.
I don't want to be too redundant, but I do want to say thank you. As was mentioned, we had, Shelley and I really had to think about who would best serve the district on this committee. And there were a lot of people who were not selected. And the reason that you're here is because not that we don't value their opinions, we do value their opinions, but we thought that this group that's here tonight could best represent the constituents involved, could best represent the best thinking in the Valley regarding the future of Summit School, and that you would be able to give us good, strong advice, and that good ideas and thoughts would come out of your collaboration. And we really appreciate your being here. The word that came to my mind was generosity, your generosity in being here. I think the most valuable thing we have in our lives is time, and for you to volunteer that and share that with us is greatly, greatly appreciated. And we're probably not going to be here too much longer. We want to let you do your work, and we don't want you to feel like we're interfering with your work. But we want to hear what you have to say. Once I think it goes along with the line. You don't want to see how sausage is made, right? So I don't know that I want to see how you're making the sausage, but I want to have a barbecue when we're done and enjoy it. So thank you again for your time. And I think I know many of you, but I don't know all of you well. And I'm hoping to learn more about you as time goes on. Anyway, thanks again.
At the barbecue.
At the barbecue. That's right.
Thank you, Thane. And again, thank you, Shelley, also for being here tonight. So again, we're going to be spending tonight's meeting really going through this packet materials, talking about what your charge is, what the board, the reason that they convened this committee to which you are a part. But before we do all of that, I think it would be really helpful to spend maybe a minute each person, and let's just go around. If you could introduce yourself, share your connection to the Ohio Unified School District, whether or not you personally attended our schools, or if you have children or family members who do or did. Again, this committee, we'll talk about in a little bit, is really focused on Summit, but this is a district committee. So you'll see, I think, a really nice cross-section between those who have direct relationship to the site at Upper Ojai at Summit School. But you'll also see that there are some people who really were selected for their ability to represent other viewpoints within the broader school district. And so I think that, again, you'll see the level of thought that Thane and Shelley put into assembling this committee. So with that, maybe I'll start over with Kate and ask you to introduce yourself again, talk about your connection to our district. We'll just go, counterclockwise from there. So start thinking if you're coming up. But you have about a minute or so we'll spend on each person, and if there's other hobbies or fun things that you think would be, you guys are going to spend some time together for the next couple months, so feel free to share whatever you'd like.
Sounds good. My name's Kate Spiva. I'm a lifelong resident of the Ojai Valley. I was born and raised here in Ojai. My parents still live in the area. I attended Topa, Matilaha, Nordhoff. This is home. My most recent interaction with Ojai Unified is I am a current 6th grade teacher at San Antonio Elementary School, and I've been working in the district here for the last 5 years. Next year I'll be moving with the Matilaha, moving to Matilaha as 6th grade transitions there.
Hello everybody, my name is Trevor Quirk. I live on Sulphur Mountain Road in Upper Ojai. I've lived there for 13 going on 14 years now. I have 3 kids. All of them are, my oldest just turned 10. They're all at Topa now. And so my connection to Upper Ojai is I plan on living there for the rest of my life. I really, really enjoy Ojai. I'm proud of it. And I'm honored to be on this committee, and I look forward to working with all of you and having a barbecue when we're all done.
Thanks, Trevor.
My name's Louisa Oseguera, and I live right across from Summit School. And I lived there about 20 years. And prior to that, I lived on McNell in the East End. My daughter attended Nordhoff High School. We moved there when she was in the 9th grade. I now had 3 grandchildren that live on the same property, and 2 of them did attend Summit before it closed. All 3 of them are at Monica Ross right now, and I'm retired probation officer from LA County.
Thank you.
I'm Christina Mercer McGinley, and my family goes way, way back. I think I'm 5th or 6th generation. My kids went to Topa and San Antonio and Matilaha. I myself am an educator. I taught at UCR for some years. And I think probably relevant to this committee, I've served as on a board of trustees for a private prep school named Webb, and we recently acquired several pieces of land, so we had to do some of that work and struggle with the community and what worked best for our students and what worked best for also nature nearby. So we dealt with a lot of issues surrounding land use.
Hi everyone, I'm Cheryl Knox. I'm currently the Assistant Superintendent overseeing educational services. Prior to this role in the district, I was the principal at Topa. I also am a parent of 2 students in the district. I have a son that attends Miners Oaks and a daughter that attends Topa. I also spent most of my life growing up in the valley. I did attend Miramani, Matilaha, and I'm a proud Nordhoff graduate as well. So.
My name is Janetta Espinoza, and I was born and raised here in the Valley. I went to Miramani School, Matilaha, and Nordhoff, and I've lived here for most of my life, except for 4 years when I went off to school. And I work for Wild Tennis Academy now. I'm the admissions director there. So.
Where did you say you worked? I didn't hear.
At the Tennis Academy, Wild Tennis Academy.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
His friend is my husband's PJ.
Oh, cool. How are you?
I'm Emily Doty. I'm sort of a newbie. I've been in Ojai for about 6.5 years. I live in Upper Ojai. I have twin girls that are 11. They go to Rock Tree Sky. They went to San Antonio before that, and then OVS before that. I was dorm parent at OVS for a few years, and now I'm a freelance writer.
My name's Bob Daddy. I've been here for a few decades. I'm on the Option J Bond Committee. I own the newspaper here in town. I'm a state farm agent also. My children graduated from Oak Park High School, which is an excellent school that we were involved in. All 4 of my grandchildren either go to high-tech, magnet, or charter schools. So I have a little bit of diversity there. I've been frustrated since '97 as the school has whittled from 4,700 odd kids down to the current 2,300 now. It's just been a very frustrating long glide. And so I'm here tonight to make sure that we can try to preserve and enhance what we still have.
I'm Jessica Colborn. I'm going to start by apologizing. I will be standing up and down. I have a herniated disc, so I am moving a lot. I apologize. I am probably the only one that is an alumni of Summit School. I graduated several years ago. Also went to Matilha, Nordhoff, and I as well have 3 kids in well, my boys graduated and are now down in Ventura, but my daughter is at Topa. She'll be going to Matilha. My parents still live in Upper Ojai. I will be moving back onto the property since they lost their home in the Thomas Fire. They just got permits. Yay! So we will be rebuilding, and I will be moving back on the property. So I will be a returning resident up there. So, yeah.
I'm Lauren Coyne. I also am a lifelong resident of Ojai, Miners Oaks, Matilha, Nordhoff. I have 2 kids who both attended Summit School. I lived in Upper Ojai for about 14, 15 years when my kids were, well, they were both born in Upper Ojai, so when they were little. My son went to Summit, Matilha, and then he went on to Villanova. And my daughter went to Summit, and then when I moved to town, she went to Miramonte because it was close to our home. And then Matilha, and then at some point in the Matilha years, she decided she wanted to be homeschooled and pulled out. So she's been attending Rock Tree Sky for the last year and a half. And while my kids were at Summit, I was on the PTO board for a number of years. I was the PTO president during a few years that were very heated with school closures, and there was a lot of discussion about strategies for keeping it open and what to have, what to do at that time. Anyway.
Can we ask questions? I just am curious when your kids went to your kids went to Summit.
What years did they
Yeah.
go to Summit?
Mm.
Let's see. Well, my son's now in college, so I think they left Summit in about 2011. Well, my daughter left Summit in 2011. I think my son left in 2010 because he went to Matilha.
Cool.
I'm James Beatty. I am a podiatrist in town. We live up on Sulphur Mountain Road as well, down at the bottom, not up with the
Howdy, neighbor.
neighbor. And my kids have grown up here. We started out at Miramonte, then to Topa, and Matilha, Nordhoff. My oldest is now at the University of Utah, so been very happy with the education that he's gotten up to this point. Youth issues are very important to me. I was involved with the Ojai Valley Youth Foundation and really like what we were able to accomplish there. And I just am very interested in making sure, like Bob said, that we do, preserve what we've got, and we keep our little town in the right direction.
Great. Well, again, welcome all, and thank you for serving on this committee. Thane, you have one of the best lines that I was thinking of as you guys were going through. Thane will sometimes introduce himself of saying that he's a relative newcomer to the Valley. He moved here in 1989.
Well, 98.
98, okay. The point being, 20 years experience in the Valley as a relative newcomer compared to many of you. So obviously one of the things that makes this community special is that we have 5th and 6th generation folks who live in the Valley still, and again, a number of you adults are alumni of our schools, and so it certainly brings a unique dynamic to our district that's different than many others in Ventura County. So let's go ahead and we will kind of explain again where we're going over the coming meetings by actually entering into our binder. So you'll see your binder, which again, I apologize.
Where the sausage starts.
gonna watch it at home.
And again, this is being filmed, so we'll have it up on our website. We'll actually have a special 7-Eleven committee page that all of the materials that you receive will be posted up there, as well as these videos. Obviously, the first page after the agenda just identifies your names and a way for you guys to communicate with one another if it becomes necessary. Page 3, we're going to spend a few minutes on. So, Kimberly, you mentioned, again, the process of where we are now and what the board has done, accurately so. So the board, in June of this past year, June of 2018, the board took action to close Summit School for this current school year, the 18-19 school year. During the course of the summer, the board authorized me to enter into what's called a license agreement, or a form of a rental agreement with various users of that space. And so Rock Tree Skies has been mentioned as one of the primary users of that space, that campus this year. We also have the Upper Ojai Council, who is a frequent user as well, and other groups. Actually, Louise, I know your daughter has been very involved with Condor Kids up there as well, so we've been able to utilize it for a number of community groups up there. The board brought this issue back to the forefront in the beginning of November, and then in December and into January to evaluate whether or not we'd be able to consider reopening school for this coming year. Determination was made in December to convene a 7-Eleven committee. The decision to close the school for at least one more year was made in January. So at this point, March 13th, what we're looking at is we know with certainty the board has made the decision to maintain the school closed for one more year. They wanted to have your work done before they made any other decision. Okay? So, again, Shelley and Thane, who have been here, Thane talked about the sausage being made. But I want to make sure that it's implicit in what I'm saying, but I'll state it explicitly. The board is the decision-making authority. The board will be the one to decide both whether or not to reopen the school, as well as whether or not to pursue alternative uses. So you guys are an advisory committee, or it's a citizen advisory committee. We call it 7-Eleven. If you don't already know by this point, it's because Ed Code says this advisory committee can be made up of no less than 7 committee members and no more than 11. So that's where the name 7-Eleven comes from. When I first came to the district, we were talking about 7-Eleven last time, I had no clue, and I was Googling it, and all I came up with was the convenience store. But that's, it's just a term, a nickname given for what the Ed Code calls a citizen advisory committee to analyze potential surplus space. So again, ultimately though, the decision, long-term decision about Summit rests with the board, but they're going to be impacted, obviously, by your deliberations. And so last time we had a 7-Eleven committee, in October of 15, we convened. We met through April of 16 to analyze, as Steve said, the elementary school configuration. We met 14 meetings. Our lawyers told us at the beginning of that meeting that 7-Eleven committees typically meet somewhere between 2 and 4 times. We met 14. I'm confident, I'm not going to make an estimate as to how many times you guys will meet, but I'm confident it's going to be more on the closer to 2 to 4 range as opposed to that 14. But ultimately, you guys will be driving the agenda from here on out. We made this agenda for you guys for this first meeting, but at the end of this meeting, we'll talk about how you want the agenda to be crafted for next meeting, and if there is additional information that you would like to receive. So again, on page 3, you can see just a little bit of that timeline of decision making. In February, you guys were actually formally appointed by the board. So the purpose of the committee, you'll see that in the bottom half of this page. What the Ed Code actually states your purpose. Again, it's not actually making decisions about long-term school closure. There's been suggestions in the community that the board doesn't have the authority to close the school indefinitely until you guys deliberate. That's not true. The board does have the authority. They just are desiring your feedback before they would consider such a decision. So the reason what Ed Code requires you to be convened for is any time there's the possibility of what they call a disposition of surplus property. Meaning anytime there's a chance that the district may lose the right of use for at least what they call a long-term use is 30 days. So if the district wanted to consider a 1-year-long lease during this upcoming school year to give exclusive access to a portion of the property, they can't do that without this committee convening. So that's one of the reasons why, among others, that for this current school year, we've entered into license arrangements, rental arrangements with the users. So again, Jim Bailey's here with Rock Tree Sky. He is using a majority of that space each day. The district has the authority. The board at any day could tell him, today's your last day using the space, we need it back. Yeah.
Did you say a disposition constitutes a use of
30
the
days or
property
longer.
For more than 30 days or longer?
Yep, that's right. So
So-
anytime, right, it's not what one may think of disposition, of actually permanently removing your your property rights, or permanently selling it to someone else, or leasing it longer term. They consider a disposition anytime there's a long-term burden on the property, which in their definition is 30 days or longer. So we could theoretically rent the space for 1 week, but we couldn't rent it for a week or a month without having to go through this process. So again, the alternative is to give what's called a license agreement. As we've said, the license agreement is non-exclusive, and it can be canceled at any time by either party. So what that means is, again, when Mr. Bailey uses it, when the Upper Ojai Council uses it, that the space that they're using, we can't give them exclusive access to. So if the Upper Ojai Council in the evening wanted to use Rock Tree Sky, classroom, they would have that ability. Rock Tree Sky does not have exclusive access to the property during their non-hours of operation. So again, licenses are non-exclusive, and there's no definite term of how long one can have the property. So at any time, the board again can say that we're ending it today. So one of the reasons that you're being convened is that at minimum for this upcoming year, we would like your feedback on whether or not it'd be appropriate to look at alternative arrangements, whether it's for Rock Tree Sky or for other potential users of the space, to give them the ability, if nothing else, than to have a full year of expectation for the use of that property. I know that at some point the committee may request that Jim speak, and we'll allow him to if they so desire, and I'm sure he'll appreciate the opportunity. But I'll just say that for his use right now, he is having to maintain a second lease because of the uncertainty that he has with the property. So again, not to suggest that he is the ultimate user you guys would be recommending for the space, but you can imagine that any other potential user of that space would have to be making similar arrangements. If they wanted to have an expectation of use for anything more than 30 days, then we have to go through this process. Okay? Does that make sense as far as the reason that we actually are convening this committee?
So when you talk about the alternate arrangements, you're talking about something other than the license agreement that's currently in place?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Okay? So what does Ed Code actually require this committee to do in order to put forward a recommendation to the board? You'll see those items outlined 1 through 4 on the bottom of page 3. You have to review the projected school enrollment and other data as provided by the district to determine the amount of surplus space and real property. Establish a priority list of surplus space and real property that will be acceptable to the community. Cause to have circulated throughout the attendance area a priority list, which obviously we will, you're causing it to happen, will just be telling me to go do it. But we will make sure the community, with Austin here and with the owner of the paper, I'm sure they'll help us also with disseminating the information. But we cause to be circulated throughout the district a priority list of surplus space and real property, and provide for hearings of community input to the committee for acceptable uses of space and real property, including the sale or lease of surplus real property for child care development purposes pursuant to Ed Code. So what that's saying is that ultimately you guys will take in whatever information you need to consider, again, whether or not this should be deemed, some it should be deemed surplus, even if only for a period of 6 months or a year. But if it should be deemed surplus or potentially longer, if so, what you would be interested in considering as potential uses of that space, and then ultimately you must hold at least one public hearing where the community, after having an opportunity to review that analysis, they're able to come to you and share their thoughts. So again, we don't know how many meetings that you'll have, but we know at minimum that we'll have at least one more in which you'll have a public hearing after you've circulated your initial ideas.
So is our first goal to determine whether it's surplus?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So one way you can view this is this is actually an order of operations. We're going to be starting with that first step and then moving into the subsequent.
What is the other data in number 1? I circled that. It says other data.
Whatever you guys want.
Okay.
So
Anything.
I've given you a bunch of information here that goes beyond what Ed Code requires, but you guys may say, as again Steve brought up the last committee, they want to look at a list of every user of each of the elementary campuses to know what impact there might be if there were a change in configuration. They want to see the operating cost of each of the school sites to be able to know what the fiscal impact was of maintaining the number of elementary sites that we had open. So this committee is the one that requests, and unfortunately Cheryl being wearing 2 hats here as a committee member and also as an admin, she may also be involved in helping get the data, just as when I was a committee member on this last 7-Eleven committee, was responsible for that financial information. But you guys make the request, and then admin will get the answer to you before the next meeting.
Excuse me, you didn't give us any data on like from 2015 to currently, how many kids were at the schools. You just gave us what was projected. I mean, did I miss something?
We'll go through the packet, and then you guys can let me know if there's new information that you'd like.
Okay, so,
Absolutely.
but I'm asking you, was that left out?
That was not left out as far as a district enrollment. I have a 7-year trailing history and a 7-year projection, but we'll get there.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so after we've had the public hearing, you'll make a final determination of the limits of tolerance of use of space and real property at the site. And then you'll forward to the district governing board a report recommending uses of surplus space and real property. So one thing that I would encourage you guys to enter into this process understanding is that I don't expect you to actually, well, I am certain that you guys will not get unanimity. You are not going to be unanimous in a recommendation. It's possible that you might ultimately take a vote on something, and that vote might be 6-5, it might be 7-3 with one abstention. Or you may actually not take a vote. What you might end up doing is having each person end up submitting their own individual perspective. Or you might have 3 people who, it's kind of Supreme Court case where you have a majority decision and 3 separate dissenting opinions, things like that. So you guys have flexibility. There's going to be a time for you to engage one another, to maybe even try to encourage someone to rethink their position. There will be some of that, might be a little bit of a debate. But ultimately, it's not an objective of this committee to get to a position where you guys, again, even have a majority all recommending the same outcome, much less a unanimous recommendation. So that's why, again, you're an advisory committee. You're not the one making a decision. And so if the advice is we have 5 people who think this should happen, we have 3 people who think this, and 2, and whatever the numbers need to be to add up to 11. That's information for the board. That is very useful information for the board. If they hear that there is such a division of perspectives, then that helps inform their deliberation. Once you guys recommend or provide your final report to the board, they will likely still take some amount of time for their own deliberations. So going back to our last 7-Eleven committee, I said that we were convened in fall of 2015. Deliberations ended spring of 2016. The board did not actually take their action on the report until September of 16. So we had multiple board meetings in May, June. We came back after the summer and started back up. And in fact, in September, if you remember, we had multiple board meetings. I believe it was once a week for the entire month of September at Matilaha, where we ultimately arrived at our final decision, which was to maintain all 5 schools open and in their current configuration. That was the decision made back in September of 16. So that's just the outline of the process that we're going to be going through in the coming meetings. Any questions on this process? Yeah.
I spent this afternoon reading the synopsis from the last 7-Eleven.
Great.
And Dimitri Corbin, Linda Jordan, and a number of people that
Yeah.
put their letters in.
Yep.
I also read your
Yeah.
perceptions of where we need to go and,
Uh-huh.
and where we're going to be. It's pretty interesting to see what the thought was in 16 and how we've moved and where we are and what we thought our projections were gonna be.
Yeah, that's right.
Is there a reason that that's not included in this packet so people can kind of look at this and get a head start on the last one to see where we are today? And again, you might want to go over the Ralph M. Brown Act so we don't have people communicating out of school where we end up having an issue.
Right. So, great question, Bob. If you guys would like to see that report, I can provide that to you in your materials. It is already available on our website, so anyone individually is welcome to get that information. The reason we made the decision not to include that this time was because we really view this as a very distinct group than that one. The reason that EDCO does not put a time limit on how long a 7-Eleven report is valid, or the report that they provide. So technically the board could have acted on the prior recommendation. However, what EdCode says is that if there's any substantive changes that would make the analysis different today than was done at the time the report was completed, then you should reconvene a 7-Eleven committee, or you should convene a new one. And so the board and I both feel that conditions have sufficiently changed from 2016, most specifically the fact that we've closed the school, and that prior to closing the school, we were reducing our enrollment from 42 down to what ultimately was about 19 kids before the decision was made to actually close the school. And so that is, to me, a very substantively different analysis than what was being considered at that time. However, again, if you guys would like it, then it could be included for your reviewing. Any other questions on process?
How long can we, I mean, you said we set our own schedule, but when is the board looking for a recommendation from this 7-Eleven committee?
About 2 weeks after you guys finish your work.
Which is up to us?
Yeah. That was intentionally vague. You guys take the time that you need. We will spend, at the end of this meeting, we'll spend some time actually, and Kathy sent an email to you guys this morning, I hope you received, that was to make sure you bring your calendars, because we would like to calendar the next at least couple meetings, if not what we foresee being potentially necessary. Ideally, if you guys are kind of getting into what you're identifying as your individual or collective positions this spring, we would prefer the report this spring rather than in the fall. But again, we wouldn't want to inappropriately rush the deliberation if there was more information needed or more conversation that had to be had. Okay?
So the enrollment data, you said that 42 to 19, is that in here somewhere that I'm just...
The summit individual data is not.
Okay. So we're just going on the fact that 42 to 19 and then closed.
So, again, we can get any information that you'd like.
Okay.
So if that's a piece of information that you guys would like to see for next meeting is summit specific, then we can absolutely provide that. We can break it down by students of residents, meaning that they live in Upper Ojai, versus those who are coming in intra. The reason it wasn't included in this initial report is that, again, this is a district committee, and so we're not actually analyzing, and this is something that I haven't said yet that may be a surprise for some. The request is not for you guys to decide, again, or make a recommendation about reopening Summit as a school. The analysis is whether or not the school should maintain the property right of being able to use it for its own purposes, whether that could be outdoor education, after-school programs, or potentially a school, but whether or not we should maintain the use of that space, or we should be willing to consider rents or leases or sale agreements. So the ask that there's been times in the past where a prior 7-Eleven committee people talked about, is this a school opening committee or a keeping schools open committee? This committee is being tasked very specifically with the use of this property. We're not asking whether or not you're recommending to the board to reopen the campus, but I could see that if you feel that enrollment is, that we have 100 kids who are living up there, that you would obviously then have that impact your decision that the district should not burden the property because you think that they're going to need to reopen it in the coming years. So does that answer the question as far as?
It does. Has the board made any projections on whether they are considering opening that in the future?
Opening the school? Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they've in no way made a commitment beyond this current school year. So,
The next school year, they closed it.
I'm sorry, when I say this current school year, I should have said this upcoming. Yeah.
Right.
The state of California has changed the hook, the stipulation on property. There were some times you could sell it, but it had to
That's
go
right.
to reduce any bonds, then they changed for this, then they changed for this, and then they allowed inclusion or exclusion, whichever you wanna make it for, employees, for housing, best uses. What's the current standard with the state for disposition of, school property now? Do you have the ability to take the proceeds and spend them at will, or are they restricted?
So I'll answer the question directly, but I think that maybe this would be a good topic to include for materials for next meeting, and we can actually have a little bit more lengthy report on what the impact would be if the district were to consider these different options. But to answer directly, what Bob was just saying is that the Ed Code has historically been, if you sell property that's district property, those proceeds can only be used to improve facilities at other district properties. So in essence, it becomes like a new bond measure. You can't use the sale of property for teacher salaries or for buying new curriculum. It only can be used on facilities. There was a period where they actually gave a waiver to that rule and allowed the proceeds to go directly into a district's operating budget to be used for any purpose the district deemed necessary. Unfortunately, that is sunset, and there's no conversation about reopening it at this time. So we're back to the situation that if the board were to entertain a sale offer on the property, those proceeds would, again, what they do is they'd supplement our Measure J dollars and allow for facility improvements elsewhere, but they would not help reduce the burden on our operating budget. But again, I think that'd be a good example of something that would be helpful for you guys I think we first have to decide what information you guys need to make a determination about whether or not it's surplus. And then the next batch of information would be, okay, if it's surplus, then what do we think about it? And I think that would be in that set.
Well, so on our first thing that we're supposed to do is review the projected school enrollment, which obviously seems to be 0 because it's not going to be open, right?
Well, we have district enrollment, which is included, and if you'd like to see obviously right now our school enrollment is 0 and next year is 0, but going into the out years, what we do is we could provide to you an estimate of how many kids will be residing in the Upper Ohio area.
But we're only supposed to be making it for the period of time that you guys have it closed, is that correct?
No, you guys can make a recommendation, and I apologize if that piece wasn't clear. The recommendation that you can make to the board would be if you guys thought it should be sold. Someone could make that recommendation to the board, even though obviously a sale of a property is going to last far longer than the 1-year closure. The board wouldn't actually entertain selling the property until they've made their initial decision to close the property permanently. But your guys' recommendation can be in whatever form, whether or not it's only for this 1-year span or for a multi-year span. Does that make sense?
But if we're determining it for next year, we've got a 0 enrollment. So if we're determining how much of that space is going to be considered surplus, obviously all of it, right? If there's nobody going there.
For next year, well, this is where the conversation would be, do you guys feel, is there any information that you could receive that would be helpful in causing you to feel that even though we don't have current students attending there, that it shouldn't be deemed surplus? Meaning, there may be someone who believes that the district needs to retain the right of full ownership for the purpose of having every single elementary class go up there 1 week of a school year to do a writing intensive where they're able to be in an outdoor nature environment and away from their current school setting, whatever it might be. But there are scenarios in which the fact that the school is not operating, that it may still be deemed that the district shouldn't call it surplus because there could be other uses for the district to use the property.
And do you have information to give us that would let us know what's being entertained for district uses for this if it's not going to be surplus?
If it's not going to be surplus, right now the intention would be to continue the same program that we have this year. License agreements with any user interested in the space.
But have you ever looked at anything else?
No.
Not a magnet school or outdoor ed or anything like that, the school district has not?
Well, we've done a lot of work on magnet schools. I'm not sure I
Well, I'm
understand your
just
question
talking
though.
about it, like, what, is there other suggestions about what the property could be used for?
Well, that's a different question than what I heard you asking. I thought you were asking about different uses of the school property if it's not going to operate as a full-time school. Your question about magnet schools and that sort of
Well,
thing assumes
just
it's operating as a
general.
full-time
It's
school.
just general use. What kind of things have been done and talked about in the past? Because this has been a long-term problem of low population in that school.
Mhm.
And I mean, they had to think of something before now.
We will-
Didn't they? I mean, I think that if they did, they should provide that to see what they've looked at.
We can review materials and have that included for next
Okay.
meeting. Yeah.
Something else I was hoping we could include is, I'm looking at page
That's
9.
actually, if you guys don't mind, let's try to go through this meeting's binder, because I'd love for us to actually get through this for this meeting. And then at the end, we'll say, okay, what new materials do you want for your next meeting? And so that could be maybe a time that, Trevor, you put that forward. Is that okay?
Sure, it's a question about the materials that are in the binder.
Well, once we get there, is that okay?
Yeah, great, thanks.
And just so you guys know, as far as ground rules, last meeting, or last 7-Eleven committee, they held their meetings always to 2 hours. You guys are free to make whatever decision you guys you'd like. They met at 7. They went 7 to 9, but some people say 7's a little too late to start. If you prefer an earlier start time, again, we'll get there at the end of the meeting as far as start time and frequency of meetings. But is there any objection to us for tonight's meeting saying that we are going to do all we can? We'll evaluate at 8:55, but otherwise we will do all we can to get out of here for in 2 hours at 9 o'clock. Okay, great. All right, so I'm not going to go through every page, but page 5 and 6, obviously you can see the ed code that relates to 7-Eleven committees. Pages 7, 8, and 9 give you a bit of what I've already discussed, but the process by which the district, convenes an advisory committee, what their responsibility is, and then it moves forward into the process of how you go about actually offering to sell the property. You'll see that in the materials, the public bid process is the natural way in which even a 30-day or longer lease is entertained. Natural way Ed Code requires us to pursue this process is through bid. There's an alternative option of soliciting a waiver from the from CDE to be able to consider bid. You must accept the high offer financially, but you can set the parameters of the bid. So let's just say that this committee where you guys end up is that you feel that there should be no recommendation beyond this 1 year, and that for this 1 year that you believe that a program like Rock Tree Sky or a program like Upper Ojai Council should be given the right to enter into a lease, a true lease, what all of us think of when it comes to lease arrangements, for the period of 1 year. You could put forward that specific recommendation to the board, and the board could structure their bid documents in such a way as to say that it can only be used for these types of purposes. And so even though you're still having to take the high bid, if you structure it in such a way, then you're going to obviously limit the proposals that would come forward, potentially down to 1. The reason for this property, we did go through the whole process to be able to get a waiver, was that we weren't prepared. If anyone doesn't know, we have been going through for the past 2 years the process of the 7-Eleven committee, then seeking the state's approval for us to not go through a bid process on exploring long-term ground leases for this property. Instead, we want a waiver, so that way we could, again, consider things other than price, but also cast as wide a net as possible. And so just to let you guys in on some inside information, we did have the RFP go out in December. The responses were received March 1st. And so we do actually have responses for potential uses of this property, which the board is going to begin to publicly evaluate here in the near future. So we do have multiple responses for potential long-term ground lease on this property. But again, the reason that it took a very long time to go through that process was that we actually had to get approval from the state for a waiver to be able to do this RFP. And again, the reason for the RFP is it allowed us to say, anyone with an idea for this property, come forward. We want to hear the idea. Give us your proposal. give us, let us know what your terms be, how much rent you'd be able to pay us, and those sorts of details. And then the board can decide together which of these ideas is the right fit for, if any, which of these ideas, if any, is the right fit for our community and for our district. So the same thing for Summit. If you guys get to the point where at minimum for...
Sorry, you're talking about this.
That's this property.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about Summit.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I'm jumping around a little bit, but that's this property.
So did we.
Yeah.
We're like,
Yeah,
really?
I knew.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I misspoke.
I thought it was solved.
What are we here for?
We're talking about this property, which is the process I was saying it took 2 years to get to this point. But I'm saying that that we could, if it's identified as surplus, and the recommendation of the board and the board's action is for us to consider uses of the space, even if it's just for 1 year, you still have both options available. Again, one would be the bid process, but you'd be very specific in the bid documents that would say, again, only 501c3s which support efforts of the Upper Ojai residents for community engagement. I don't know. You could probably define Upper Ojai Council better than I could. But in such a narrow way as to again limit the types of responses. That would be a way of doing it through a bid. It would be a very quick process. So potentially, if you guys come to a recommendation in the next few months, the board could receive that, approve a bid, and we could be under contract with the user, even if it's only for 6 months or a year before the start of next school year. So just so you guys understand the timing. But again, I'm not trying to put the cart before the horse. You may decide that you don't want to consider the property surplus even for this current upcoming year.
So you said if it was surplus, one was bid, what was the other?
Waiver. A waiver from the bid.
Okay.
And a waiver from the bid allows you to have even more flexibility in entertaining offers.
And that's what you talked about here, where you do
Exactly.
potential ground lease proposals and stuff
That's
like
right.
that.
That's exactly right. Okay. Moving on to the next tab in your binder, enrollment. So what you'll see is we have our enrollment shown for the district. Louise, this is what I was talking about as far as that 7-year history as well as the upcoming 7. Bob has a great memory as far as where our district has been. We have been declining enrollment for about 20 years. 97, 98 was our high year. I decided not to, for the sake of not wanting to become depressed, I did not show the information dating all the way back to 97, 98. But we were well over 4,000 students. You can see that even as recent as 12, 13, we're over 2,800. And for this current school year, we're at 2,374. As a brief tangent or an aside, many districts in Ventura County right now are dealing with declining enrollment. Pretty much if you're outside the Oxnard Plains, you're dealing with declining enrollment. My home district where I attended as well as worked, Moore Park, has been dealing with declining enrollment. However, I have no patience to listen to their complaints about their declining enrollment because when they say they've had declining enrollment, they're talking about 10 to 15% off of their peak. We have had almost 50%. There are only about 5 districts in the entire state of California. We have 1,000 districts in our state, only about 5 that are anywhere near on par with us. Big Bear is the one specifically that comes to mind, and their losses came directly from wildfires and 2 big wildfires over the past 20 years that destroyed a lot of houses within their district. But yeah, we've had very challenging enrollment, and unfortunately we aren't actually yet at our what we project to be our bottom. You'll see that we are looking at next year being another about 60 student loss, 2313. The year after, 2260, 2200, and then we settle in around 2100. And we do actually have a fair degree of confidence in these numbers because what you'll see is that we've actually developed a bit of a pretty clear trend line. If you look at kindergarten through 5th grade, 6 straight years, you'll see we're at 161, 161, 171, 148, 174, 162. That's actually a pretty tight bunching of enrollments for those periods. In fact, if you look at the prior year, those numbers were even a bunch closer. We actually had a big drop, an unusual drop this year in 3rd grade. You can see 3rd grade relative to the prior year. But what we're projecting for our district is about 160 students per grade moving forward. And so again, we have 6 straight years of around 160. what you'll see is the numbers going forward in the projection assumes about 160 student kindergarten incoming each year. We're actually really good at projecting enrollment once they're in our system. Kind of a bit of a no duh, but once they're in our system, if you ask me, where is a current kindergartner going to attend school next year, very high likelihood that they're going to attend school at the same school they're at for kindergarten. Once they're in our district, there's actually very little movement. What you'll see is there might be 5 kids who move out one year, but you have 4 who move in. So it's very steady. So these numbers, once they enter into our system, is consistent. The uncertainty is the size of the kindergarten cohort. But again, we feel like that uncertainty is diminishing. It's becoming more certain because we have 6 straight years all hovering around that 160 mark. The mean and median both are within a couple of 160. Okay? So again, as a district, we've had significant decline, and that decline will continue on for another 200 plus students. So what I've heard already is that you guys would like to see Summit separated out individually. Would you like to see only Summit, or is the request about all elementary school sites having updated information?
I think all.
I think all.
Okay.
And some of it, I think, needs to be explained about what happened to some of the kids, the fire and the change of the 6th graders, because some people probably don't know that.
So the change of the 6th graders, if you're talking about, are you talking about the district transitioning
Right,
6th grade to
right,
Matilaha?
out of the,
So that hasn't started yet. That starts next year, and so that's why you'll see in the projection that the 6th grade is below the subtotal line now. But I think you're right. That's a good point as far as at least giving explanation for that.
right.
As far as students who lost their home in the fire who then left our district, the number is actually very, very low. But we can provide that information as well.
Okay.
Of course, I know it doesn't need to be said, but I'll say that even a single child who lost their home, our heart goes out to. And for those who I know around this table have personally experienced that, or your neighbors did, I don't mean to in any way minimize by saying there's few kids. Obviously, it's still a devastating occurrence.
Well, maybe also like how many kids were at Summit and what happened to them after you closed the school.
Sure.
The numbers.
What about Upper Ojai's demographics in general? How many folks, like when I think of Upper Ojai, at least for the neighborhood council purposes, we put it as roadblock to roadblock from the fire. That was like basically Bacalli's to right around Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah.
And what I was curious about is how many people live within that area, and of those people, how many have children who would go to Summit, like my kids,
Or Matilaha, or,
just the ages that they could attend Summit, and then of those people, where are their kids actually going to school? I would
Sure.
love to know that.
So there's a little bit of a challenge there, because the information that we have is only for those kids who are actually in our district.
Okay.
So we don't have, we do have census information, but the census information is now 9 years old and it's pre-fire. So I don't know how useful or relevant it would be. Unfortunately, we're a year away from the next census, so the information is going to be less than useful when it comes to the overall community in Upper Ojai. But we can provide to you. We can look at the past 5 years of our enrollment overall and look at how many of those kids resided within Upper Ojai, the Summit boundaries, and then where did they go before Summit closed. We can see how many stayed at Summit versus came down the hill for somewhere, and then after closure, where are those kids? We can get that information.
can you also identify the diversity that was at Summit? Because there were kids from Piru, Santa Paula.
We can certainly, we have to be careful given the population size that we not give identifying information. So
Right.
the one student from Piru, I'm going to guess, is Kimberly's daughter or child. But right, we have to be.
There was more than one, I think.
Yeah, from
Yeah,
Fillmore,
from
not from
Fillmore.
Piru. But the point being is that anytime in education we have less than 10 students, we become very careful with what information becomes publicly available because of confidentiality. But I understand the request, and we will do, I'll present to you information at the next meeting about demographics of the Upper Ojai students.
So if we're talking about the metrics that were used for knowing the metrics that were used to close Summit, and then knowing those same metrics in the projected 7-year enrollment, I think both of those would be, important for us to look at.
I'm sorry, can you clarify the initial?
There were metrics that were used when you guys looked at closing the school originally. Enrollment metrics,
Yeah,
things
okay,
like that.
sure, yes.
So, what were they then, and then what are they projected to be?
Sure.
So, that'll help us know if they're projected to be worse, then
Yeah.
we can probably extrapolate that you guys aren't gonna rush out
So-
to try and do that.
Yeah.
We can't guess what the board will do, but that will help us determine whether this is gonna be surplus or not.
Right. I understand the request, and I'll do my best to be responsive. It's a challenge when you only have somewhere between 20 and 50 kids involved, because literally, 2 families moved to Idaho, and the projection looks, different. What looks like 24 might actually be 18, or what looked like 24 might be 32. So we'll give you the best, but once we start talking about projecting future years of a small population size, you have a higher likelihood of variance. But we can
But you'll
still
give us all the projection for Summit. Great.
we can do that. Okay, so no further questions on that. We'll move into the next tab, our facilities capacity. So what we did, we actually excerpted from the prior. Actually, perhaps we didn't excerpt. I think it's actually the entire report. It's the whole report. This is the entire report. It goes from page 11 to page. Let's see. Page 29, page 30. Actually goes to page 38. So within this section of your materials, we actually have a few different pieces of information or different reports. So I wanted to draw your attention to that, just if it was confusing when you were going through it. There is actually, one is a report in its entirety. It gives you the information on our facilities across the district. You'll be able to see, again, for Summit School, we're looking at page
19.
19 and 20. Starts on 19 and the majority continues on 20. You'll see again the spaces and the time that this report was done, the availability of classrooms, and this can also become a helpful metric if we are talking about different buildings, since each classroom might have 8 different ways to identify it. We can use this as identifying information.
How many acres is the actual Summit property? This 19 says 1.25, but
But
is
then there's a
there?
4-acre parcel next to it.
Right, that was my.
Yeah, I believe it's
question.
5 acres approximately, but that will be another piece of information that we get for you.
There is actually a page in here that says that.
Okay.
It's on the page 43 and 42, well, 43 and 44. They have the assessor's parcel maps that show because there are 2 separate parcels, as far as I understand it. One is a 1.25 and the other is a 4.06, I think it was.
And so is this?
4.17.
Here's the one next door.
Is the committee considering the use of both parcels or just the 1.25 acre parcel?
Great question. So absolutely, you guys have the flexibility to weigh in on either or. If you guys, again, believe that we should be surplusing out long-term, that 4 acre, to consider alternative long-term uses for it, but to maintain the potentially as a park for the community or other development, but then keep the school campus separate, then that would be something that you could put forward. So you could analyze, one or both parcels. Okay, so then I'm not going to go through that facility study report, but I just want to make sure you understood that that was a separate report that went to page 38. Starting on page 39, you'll see some facilities information. The first piece of information is just, again, identification of the buildings, their age. You'll see 1964, 65 is when the campus came in, and then the relocatables in 1989. So relocatables are 30 years old. If you would like, we can provide analysis a little bit more in depth on the facilities. But 30 years is absolutely considered the end of the usable life of classroom portables. These are actually in pretty good condition, so just because it's deemed the typical usable life doesn't mean that we need to be looking at removal. But just so you guys know, 30 years on portable classrooms or relocatable classrooms is considered a good life. The next bit of information starts on page 46. On page 46, you'll see what we call our FIT. It's the Facility Inspection Tool. The state requires we do this report for every school site in our district. Surprisingly, perhaps, what this report is actually saying is that the facility is in good shape. And certainly if you see this report compared to our other sites, you'll see that actually this is one of our facilities in the best condition among our sites. And so you can see again a few places in which they go between a good rating to a fair rating. If you want to understand this first page on page 46, the summary page, but then the detail continues on with page 51. Between 46 and 51, you'll see a more in-depth explanation of how they're telling us to evaluate the property in each individual classroom.
He must have inspected it after Jim did his tune-up on the outside of it.
Yeah.
Because it's rated at fair.
Yeah.
Good job, Jim.
If you note the inspection, Russ did it, when was it? I saw it. Yeah, it was definitely after Jim's work.
Is there anything in here that, I should have brought my Measure J book. Is there anything in that here that shows allocation of bond funds?
So that's something that we didn't include. That'd be probably another good piece of information that you'd like to see is if the district retains use of that site, then obviously we would use the funds that have been committed. The board has approved a full plan for the expenditure of our $35 million Measure J bond, and it does have projects included within that plan. And so I can present to you the plan, and obviously, again, that would be something for you to think about if we are going to maintain active use of that site long term. Those would be improvements that are necessary. Obviously, if we were not to maintain our use of it long term, then perhaps some of those funds could be reallocated. I gave you in the next set of materials a whole bunch of information on the Brown Act.
Is that perhaps they could be reallocated, or they would be reallocated?
They would be. If we're not using the space, we're not going to fund repairs on a space that we don't need ourselves.
My point was, is we already have money sitting there.
Right.
It's already been allocated.
That's
It's
right.
our money. We've indebted ourselves. It's a tool, and it has specific purposes that we've already evaluated where it needs to go. So when you look at this chart that said, this is good on the roof, this isn't good, that's
right.
That's already set. We have that.
Gotcha.
But that's in a different committee, so.
That's right. Many of you wear multiple hats in this community, and Bob, as he said earlier, serves in our Citizen Oversight Committee, and so he is would probably be very knowledgeable on this topic, even if he were not on that committee. But given his role on that committee, knows the bond inside and out. So the last set of materials, again, is just the Brown Act. I'm going to give you a 30-second review of what I hope none of you actually, spent more than 20 minutes or so reading all these pages. It was something for skimming, not for in-depth highlighting and note-taking. As I said, the board actually has authorized your existence, your creation, which is different than certain other subcommittees that a district might convene. Again, different than PTO organizations or other support organizations for the school district. Because you were authorized by the elected body, formally approved at the meeting, at a board meeting, it means that you are subject to the Brown Act. The Brown Act, each state has some form of a Sunshine Law Act. The Brown Act is what we in California call our sunshine law. What that means is that any public deliberative body, any body like yourself, body meaning the group, the committee as a whole, cannot have a quorum, cannot have more than half of you communicating about areas under your purview outside of an agendized meeting. So just so you know, the school board is also, of course, subject to the Brown Act. And so when I am talking with the board in advance of a meeting about individual topics or about creating our agenda, I only ever have 2 of them in the room. And so the other 3 have to trust the judgment of those 2 working with me. And if they disagree, then that's what the meeting itself is for, is to say, actually, I don't like this resolution. I think we should edit it. And if you've seen our meetings recently, that often happens. And so likewise for you guys, we couldn't say, hey, let's all go over to OBC after and keep this conversation going. It's been so fun. We need to make sure that we stay within the confines of an agendized meeting. I think that you guys will get that pretty easily. I mean, that's pretty intuitive. What's not as intuitive is emails. We have to be very careful when it comes to emailing the entire group. As soon as, again, 6 people are on an email and you're talking back and forth, hey, I think that this is a really good idea that we should be talking about more in our next meeting. Once you have that actually becomes a Brown Act violation. Things need to be done in a public setting. We need to have an opportunity for the public to be present. For the the video camera to be recording, and so your deliberations are something that those who are interested in how you arrived at your decision have the ability to actually go back and see how you arrived at whatever report you'll be providing. So again, email is the most likely way in which Brown Act violations occur. The other challenge within email is that sometimes people think, well, if I only email one person at a time, but I'm having conversations with 4 or 5 people, and I had one conversation with another committee member at Bonds, that I'm okay because it was never all of us together. It's called a serial meeting if you end up having that happen, where you end up having people in an indirect way communicate with a majority of this committee. So best advice, if you have questions, comments, suggestions on what you want to see this committee accomplish, just email them directly to me, and once we have a chair, you can email it directly to the chair. So the chair and myself will become the recipient of that feedback, and then we'll make determinations about how best to support you in whatever you've requested or identified as a discussion topic. Okay. The other way in which Brown Act violations can occur is if in a meeting you end up going off of the agenda and end up talking about, a totally unrelated topic. So again, the board, it's more common, this committee, obviously the purpose that you're here tonight, the purpose that you'll be coming together each time. The board, it's more common that someone might come up during public comment and say, I really think you need to think about, X topic, totally unrelated to anything that they were planning on discussing that night. They can't engage the topic just because the community member brought it forward. They have to actually say, thank you so much for bringing that forward. We'll talk about into this meeting whether or not we want to add it to a future agenda, so that way we can then engage the topic. So that is something that you guys also would be expecting. Now again, our agenda is sufficiently broad that everything we've talked about so far is appropriate, and I think nearly everything that we could imagine talking about here is going to be appropriate because we will structure the agenda sufficiently broad. But because we didn't actually identify, not that I actually would have wanted this, but because we didn't identify for a vote the identification of a chairperson and approving that person, we actually couldn't, even if someone jumped up, if Cheryl insisted that she be the chairperson, we actually couldn't take that vote right now because we haven't agendized the vote. Okay, so that's the Brown Act in a nutshell. Any questions on that? So at this point, that's your materials for tonight, so we can engage in a conversation around what additional materials you want. Remember again, that page 3 that we spent a bit of time talking about that has kind of the order of what you're seeking to accomplish. The first thing that we need to accomplish is reviewing whatever materials you deem necessary to eventually be able to arrive at a decision about whether or not this should be deemed surplus property. And if so, for what duration? Is it surplus for only a year but nothing longer, or is it not surplus at all? So we've talked about a few things already. Kathy's been taking notes, and so we have anything that's been brought up. Are there other pieces of information? And depending on the amount, we may not have all of it come back to you at the next meeting, or maybe it'll come back to you in written form, but we'll only talk about certain parts because we don't have enough time. But what else would you guys like to have before arriving at a determination about surplus, which will only be the first step before identifying, again, other uses or whether or not it should be sold or leased and that sort of stuff? Yeah.
I would like to know the cost to maintain the property currently.
Okay.
And what you're currently getting for a lease on the property.
Absolutely.
And how much the fair market value is for a lease on school property?
Okay. We will, a challenge with that is obviously securing a appraiser or realtor to provide an analysis at little to no cost to the district. We have to rely on the graciousness of our local community. We did have an analysis done 2 years ago during the last 7-11 committee, so I think that's what I'll put forward at first. And if there's any really strong disagreement, then we can talk about, is there a better way for us to be able to get you guys information on that?
I hate to keep going back to the surplus definition, but when is it a situation where it wouldn't be considered surplus?
I don't want to tilt you in a direction of saying that it is surplus, but if you're feeling that it is so intuitive, then perhaps others are as well. That's what you guys have to ultimately deliberate and determine. But again, an example could be if you felt that, again, either conditions might exist in this upcoming year that the board could change their decision mid-year, which is possible, very unlikely, but that could happen. Or that, again, the district had an alternative use for it that wasn't operating as a full-time classroom-based school, but that the district otherwise benefits from having control over that space.
So I guess the other piece of information we would want is, does the district have a plan now for that would make it not surplus?
We have no plan at this time for the use of that space.
Okay.
But have you ever had a plan?
We have had no plan for the use of that space that does not include it operating as a school.
Or increasing the enrollment of the school?
Well, that's a different topic, and certainly that's extensive, but that's a little outside the purview of the question and also of what we're really trying to focus on here as far as the district's, whether or not it's surplus. Yeah.
Would it be appropriate to take into consideration the land use? This is a PL zone, and so it's going to be extremely limited in what it can be used for without going through
Without
proper
rezoning.
channels and getting a whole rezoning and getting all kinds of other things. We see that. We're going to see that happen right here at Chaparral.
If something moves forward.
We're going to be ready for that one. That's going to be up in the same area there too. So
Bob, what's a PL?
a public land.
Public land.
We have 19 public land zones within the city. We have churches and schools and things like that. Those are public land use.
Gotcha.
So you couldn't go put a mini Kmart up there because the zoning's not correct. You couldn't put in a
Without
factory
rezoning.
up there. Right,
Correct.
without rezoning, so maybe
Yeah,
you need
we
a
can-
little
we
paragraph
can do a little-
in there so everybody understands that just because you buy a piece of property doesn't mean you get to use it
That's a good point.
in the manner in which you want.
Sure.
Okay, because that's
Yeah.
gonna be
that's a very good
unique
point.
up there. And then the other thing is because of the,
Do you think that helps you, though, with the process of identifying whether or not it's surplus, or does that actually kind of move us into, which it's okay if we are moving into, but really moving into, the priority list of whether or not we want to consider leases for sale and what sort of uses we would want to entertain?
again, if you're gonna use it as a getaway, like my kids used to go to, then we take them down to Malibu Park, get them that out-of-school adventure, they'd camp out for a week, do things like that. I mean, those things are all gonna be acceptable uses. And it's something that the school can use now, the school can use 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just so they understand, because there are gonna be a number of options here.
Sure.
But there are gonna be a number of options that are not gonna be a fit
Mm-hmm.
for that type of thing, so.
Yeah, Trevor.
I have two things that come to my mind. Number one is Jim Bailey is here, and he's obviously using the property. I don't know if it's agendized that he can come up and talk to us about what his use of the property, how many kids he has using that property, how much he charges the kids, because I heard Kim say that if she could rewrite it, her child wouldn't have been able to afford. I think that's what was said about Rock Tree Sky. I'd like to know a bunch of stuff from Jim. I think it would probably help us go forward. And then secondly,
So let me just, before we go to second,
yeah,
it wouldn't be appropriate to do it tonight,
Okay.
but I'll talk to Jim after this and see if he's willing. Obviously, he's not under compulsion, but it seems like he's willing. So
Yeah.
I think at our next meeting that we'll have some written materials on what he's going to present, as well as allow him to present and have you guys ask questions.
And can that be found on your website? A lot of that information?
Probably not necessarily how many kids. The price could be found. There are other pieces of information I'd like to add. The fact that majority of our families access public funds through homeschool, virtual charter school programs. Certainly that doesn't cover all of the fees. That covers fees for a certain amount of time, a certain number of days. And so I could definitely articulate the details of that to you and would love to explain that.
Second.
You had
second-
another point.
Yeah, sorry. The second issue was when this was all starting to happen, and I think it was in the Thomas Fire days, we were talking with Marilyn, who was the principal there, I believe, and we were kind of using the property, and the Upper Ojai Council started using the property, and we started thinking about the Oakview Community Center. And I know that we went and actually, I think Jessica went and actually visited the woman who created the Oakview Community Center, and I believe it arose out of something very similar to this. And if that's
Oh,
true,
it definitely what did arise out of that, because it was district property, which they would have had to go through a similar process.
right?
Yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of Upper Ojai folks via Facebook and other avenues who said, one of the uses that they would love to see is to make this into some type of community center. You've mentioned a park, other people have said similar things. And so I would be very curious to know, one, is it zoned properly to do that? I think it is. And two, what avenues or what processes that we have to go down to do something like that? How do we get the funding? How do you, and whether it's possible to do something similar to what happened at the Oakview property.
So I think what we'll do is we'll reach out to the folks who are involved in the Oakview property and have them talk about their experience. It'd be outside the purview of the district to be going through the process of trying to identify funding sources for a recreation center. We wouldn't be able to do that for currently, but we certainly could see if we can get someone here who can talk about their experience with the transition there.
Cool, that's great.
Yeah, definitely. Is there other information that would be beneficial?
So are you gonna provide the census, 9 years ago census information?
If you would like the census information, we can provide it.
Because
And
that's all that's available right now, right?
that is all that's available right now.
They don't do like something every couple of years?
They do some rough projection updates, but the census that has the accurate information is every decade.
Okay.
You know who have it, Louise? Realtors have that information.
Well, they have the address of everybody in Upper Ojai.
Right.
You could contact them individually.
You could. No.
Someone could.
You're retired, aren't you? Come on.
Great
Yes.
job, Mr. Chairman.
You
I'm doing
mentioned other people who are using the space as well, like Condor Kids, and I know Chief Peak 4-H uses it, and just how it would be
Would you like
great
a
to
report
just
on that?
know who all is using
Sure.
it and how it's.
So we can provide a report on who was using it prior to the school closure and then who's been utilizing it this year. That'd be helpful.
Time for calendars.
I think we're already there. Look at us. We're going to get well in advance of 2 hours this first meeting. So go ahead and pull out your calendar. It's going to be very difficult for district administration to be able to do the sort of analysis that you guys are appropriately requesting and turn it back to you in less than a 2-week in-between meeting span. So I don't think that you'd necessarily want to meet every week, but even if you wanted to, I'm saying that we wouldn't be able to get you meaningful responses to your request in that time. So I would encourage you, especially given the timing of spring break, to look at one more meeting in March and then perhaps a meeting immediately following spring break. So let's just begin with the question of, is there any day of the week that just is always absolutely can't make?
Monday and Friday, those are terrible.
Monday and Friday?
Mondays are bad.
Tuesday can't do.
Softball.
Okay, so does anyone have objections to focusing on Wednesday and Thursday exclusively? And then we can determine if there's individual issues? Okay. So then why don't we just look straight to 2 weeks from today, Wednesday the 27th.
I'm in New Orleans.
Are you? Are you in New Orleans the whole week?
Yes, I am.
Yes, they do.
So one thing that you guys are gonna have to decide is, at what point is the threshold at which we, postpone or not hold a meeting versus, there are gonna be times where you'll hold meetings with only, 7, 8, 9, 10 people. Of course, the goal would be to have everyone present for every meeting, but as I looked at the calendar already, again, if we don't have the option of next week, which I'm saying we don't, then really, if the following week is out and then the following week is spring break, I assume spring break is out of the question, but I shouldn't assume that. Did you say? Okay. So then the next meeting would be April 10th. You guys can do that, but that is a long gap between now and then. Are there other dates that want to be considered before the 10th?
Well, why don't we consider whether, if one person can't be there, if that's suitable to us?
Are you here on the 28th?
I'm not.
So you can do that.
But can everybody else?
Everybody else could be here?
Andy,
Yeah.
just for a point of order, since this is a 7-11 committee,
Mm-hmm.
is a quorum 4? Is a quorum of 7-4?
A quorum is of the actual constituent body. So you guys are made up of 11, so it's going to be 6.
6.
Yep.
Can you
So we can
telephone
meet
into
with
the
6
meeting?
only.
I might be able to, depending on what's going on, but that's an option. Or if.
Did you say call in?
Can we have somebody call into a meeting?
Absolutely. You can call in. You can Skype in if you want to have us have a video monitor with you, and you can have a
Did you say
video.
you go down to New Orleans? Yeah, that'd be cool.
Gotta be careful of what's in the background.
The beads flying.
Well, I'm also assuming there would be a way to catch me up appropriate to the
So-
Brown Act.
So
after.
absolutely. So again, all meetings will be video recorded, so you can always watch the video, and you can also have a 20-minute phone call with me or with the chair to to have a to review.
Those all sound like reasonable options.
Great. So if you're okay with it, then Christina, does everyone feel the 27th is the appropriate next meeting date?
Yeah.
Now, starting time, were you guys okay with 7 if we again commit to being out of here by 9, or do you want to look at something a little bit earlier?
Earlier would be better.
Second that.
So board meetings start at 5:30. Is 5:30 too early? Do we want to look at 6, or should we just do the same thing our board meetings do and start at 5:30?
I like 5:30.
5:30 is okay.
5:30 to 7:30?
Awesome.
Okay, so we're saying the meetings are going to be, roughly 2-hour duration. Do our best to stick to that. 5:30, 7:30. The next one's going to be on the 27th. April 10th. How did that look for everyone?
Yep.
10th was good?
Yes.
Why don't we go ahead and schedule at least one more for April, and then we can evaluate either if you guys want to keep looking forward. I mean, it's always easier to get dates on the calendar now than to try to do it later. But if you prefer, we could just stop at 3. I'm seeing facial expressions of let's just calendar a few extra meetings and we'll hold the dates, and then if we get to release them, then we always enjoy that. April 24th. Does that one still look good? No.
We have the 20.
We've already said the 10th, so now we're moving on to 2 weeks later. The 24th, I'm hearing one person that's not good for. Does the Anyone else have an issue with 24th? What about the 25th as an alternative? Would that work for you, Jessica?
I'm gone that whole week.
That whole week, okay. So then we'll do the same thing.
Yeah.
You can watch the video and call a chair or myself.
Okay.
24th work for everyone?
Yes.
Let's just go ahead and book out May. Again, it's possible we won't need it, but let's do it. Our board meeting that month is May 8th, which means that we couldn't go just straight 2 weeks from our meeting on the 24th. So we could either do a Thursday that week, or we'd be looking to the meeting following, or the week following. How does the 9th look to you guys?
I'll be unavailable.
Only one? Everyone else is good on the 9th? Thursday the 9th? What's that?
I'm away, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, yeah, we won't have to take minutes after tonight. So keep that in mind. Again, we are going to ask for a chair as well as a secretary. If we don't have a secretary, then we're going to volunteer Bob. May 9th worked.
That's what you get.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then let's do one last one in May, the 22nd or 23rd. Anyone have one date versus the other that works best?
23rd is not good for San Antonio, and there's a spring.
Oh yeah, I see that. Spring
Nordoff.
Showcase and Nordoff. So let's look to the
I'm gonna be
22nd.
gone.
What about the 22nd then instead of the 23rd?
22nd is good for everyone. What's up, Louise? What's that?
As far as I know.
Okay. So let's go ahead and tentatively book the 22nd.
March 27th.
I'm really impressed that we're able to, it looks like have at least 10 at every meeting. That's excellent. Again, we understand that things do come up. If you're unable to make it, we would appreciate if you could email Kathy just to give us the heads up, so that way the chairperson will know, if we're missing a member or two and it's 5:35, whether or not to just go ahead and proceed or give another minute or two. It's always helpful to know if we should be expecting you. So we'll assume that you're coming unless we hear otherwise. But again, email Kathy if something comes up any particular day. If anything comes up after this meeting, again, you're welcome to email me directly. If you are willing to be so generous with your time and exhibiting of your leadership skills as to be willing to serve as chair or secretary, go ahead and email me before the next meeting, so that way I can have a sense whether or not we have anyone, or if I have to start begging before the meeting, because it always gets a little awkward if we ask for a raise of hands and no one comes forward. So, okay. We have lots of materials to get to you, which we will do our best to get to you as soon as possible. We'll do the same thing as we did for this last go-around. We will make them available electronically as soon as we have all the materials ready. And then we'll have hard copies. Does anyone actually prefer to have the hard copy in advance? What we've found is that some people like to have a hard copy, but they're fine getting it the day of because they are digital people that will review it electronically. And others like to be able to come in and pick up a hard copy, the Friday before or something. Is there anyone who will desire a hard copy in advance of the meeting?
Can we get the digital copy at least Friday or even a little before?
We'll make sure that at minimum you get it the Friday before our Wednesday and Thursday meeting. So that will give you the weekend and then a couple days in the week. Okay?
What's your email?
My email is acantwell. You'll see my last name spelled under the administrator line of your first page of your agenda. At OUSD.org. Kathy's email is ksmith at OUSD.org. Okay.
Great.
Anything else for the good order tonight?
Thank you.
All right, guys. Great first meeting. Thank you very much.